I'm going to teach you in this lesson how to do a standard rhythm that can be applied to an awful lot of songs. It goes like this. Now, it involves playing using quarter notes as downstrokes and eighth notes as well, down and up strokes. Let's see how it's done. With the right hand pattern, we're going to be going down, up, or 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Of course, we're going to be hitting the strings at certain points. But before we do that, and before I show you, let me tell you that in the left hand, I'm holding down an E major chord, which sounds like this. Now let's take a look at the bar broken down into eighth note patterns, which is the first eighth note is the 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and. Now this is how it's played. On the 1, you hit the strings. On the and after 1, you come up and miss the strings. And as I mentioned before, make sure that your hand goes down and up smoothly, rather like the wing of a bird, rather than the ticking of a mechanical clock, where there's a danger that your hand or the pick will stand still for a second here at the bottom of the strings, or stop abruptly at the top of the strings, making for a more mechanical down and up motion rather than a nice flowing motion like that. You can even practice really just going down, up, and not even hitting the strings, but counting the eighth notes like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, just to get the feel. Anyway, back to the rhythm in question. We go down on the 1, we come up on the and miss the strings, then we go down on the 2 and hit the strings, and then up on the and after 2 and we hit the strings. So we have 1 and 2 and. Again, 1, 2 and. One more time. 1, come up and miss, 2 and hit the strings. Then on the count of 3, we want to drop the hand down and miss the strings. So on the 3, although it may be tempting to hit the strings, actually you should miss them and drop down. So we get 1, 2 and miss. 1, 2 and 3. Now, I should also point out, once again, as mentioned before, on upstrokes, because they're on the and, the weak point of the beat, you don't really have to feel like you have to hit all the strings. It's sufficient enough just to strike or brush against a few of the strings rather than all 6 of them. So we got to the third beat. We went 1 and 2 and 3 where we miss, and then on the and after 3 we hit. So we have 1, 2 and miss, and then on the fourth beat we hit the strings. So we now have 1 and miss, 2 and miss, 3 and 4. Again, 1, 2 and 3 and 4. As I speed it up a bit, the overall rhythm becomes apparent. Now, after the 4, we want to come back up quietly, that is, we don't hit the strings, and then we're at the next bar where we can begin. So broken down slowly, it's 1 and 2 and miss, 3 and 4 and, notice the and after 4 I come up and don't hit the strings. So it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and miss and 4 and repeat again. Slightly increased speed, it sounds like this. Now there are a few things you should watch out for. One thing is when you're missing the strings, whether it's on a downstroke like on the third beat, or whether it's the and after 1, or the and after 4, when you don't hit the strings, there is a tendency when you're first learning to play this rhythm to suddenly speed up, because there isn't the friction of the strings slowing you down. So be careful that when you're playing the rhythm, you don't suddenly speed up unnecessarily in the places where you don't hit the strings. That's an important point. Try and keep it nice and even. 1, 2, and 3, and 4. 1, 2, and 3, and 4. And remember, the speed that you go down with a downstroke is the same speed that you come up with an upstroke. Just some little important points to remember. Now you can also use that rhythm for changing chords. In fact, I would suggest you use the E, the A, the E, and the B7 that we used in the previous lesson. So you could go that. Just a few things to watch out for with the left hand as well. When you're doing a rhythm like the one I've just taught you, let's say you're changing from E to A, be sure that on the last beat where you hit the strings, like on the 4, when you switch like that, make sure that on the last beat of the E that your fingers aren't already lifting off on their way to A and you cut off some of the E chord. It's very easy to do that, especially if you're anxious and thinking ahead of moving to the next chord. You end up with this kind of sound. See where I had part of the E chord and part of the open strings as I was moving on. So the way you get around that is to hold that E chord to the very last minute and then change. Same back from A to E. It's very easy to go. So you're getting that chopped off sound when you're going back, and same from E to B7. So the trick is to hold it down, 3 and 4, 1, 4, like that. The rhythm I'm showing you works quite well with a lot of songs. The problem is when you buy music, a sheet of music, and you've got the lyrics and you've got the notes written out, and you've got usually chord diagrams, very often the intended rhythm isn't written out by the publisher. But this kind of rhythm that I've shown you, or variations of it, will work. When I say variations of it, I mean instead of, say, missing on the 3, you may want to hit on the 3. But as long as you've identified a bar of music, whether it's 3 beats or 4 beats, your strum pattern will involve those 8th note down and up strokes. So as long as you keep in time, you can work out your own rhythms and be able to play along to the songs. To wind up this lesson, I want to show you other types of chords that are played besides the ones we've learnt in this position here. And those are bar chords. Now, as a beginner, you'll find bar chords extremely difficult to play because they involve placing your first finger right behind the fret and covering all 6 strings. Now, the nearest we came to a bar chord was that F chord, which was very difficult to press the first and second string. And I'm sure you're still having a few problems trying to get those notes to sound really nice and clean. Now, there are different versions of bar chords. The easiest ones to try are ones where you simply press with 3 fingers down on the first 3 strings. So we'll take our first finger and we'll press at the 3rd fret on the 1st, 2nd and 3rd string. And if you position your thumb under the neck where your first finger is, but at the back of the neck, and squeeze your thumb and finger together like that, you should be able to produce a nice clean sound. If you're getting this sort of thing, don't worry. With a bit of practice, you'll be able to squash your finger down nice and neatly behind the fret and get a clean sound. If your finger comes onto the top of the fret, you'll get a muffled or muted sound. And once again, if you're too far back, you'll get that awful sound which is referred to as fret buzz. So you can start out with 3 strings, the 3rd fret, and if that's too difficult, you can try the little bar we used, what I call a mini bar on the 1st and 2nd string that we used at the 1st fret for F. You can try that at the 3rd fret on the 1st and 2nd string, just 2 notes, and gradually work your way to 3. Now, if you can get that nice and clean, you may wish to try all 6. And there's some things to be careful of. Again, the usual thing of your first finger coming over the fret and getting a dull sound. Another thing to watch out for is your finger bending in an awkward fashion. Usually if your finger bends like that, a lot of the time it's caused because your thumb is too far around the neck this way. You may want to put your thumb right under the neck again, right level with where your first finger is, like this, and it will straighten your first finger out. And you can try and get each of the individual strings to ring by playing them and checking out whether all the tones are nice and clear. Some of the places, like where your finger has grooves, where the bends are, where the joints are, sometimes a string will find its way right under that groove and again produce fret buzz, but you can move your first finger up a bit so that more of a fleshy part of your finger is involved in pressing down the string, like that. Now, one final thing, if this isn't killing you with pain at this point, if you can manage a full bar sound, you may want to try adding, for example, an E major chord shape, like that. And you can see I'm getting a nice clean sound. It's because I've been playing the guitar for a long time, of course, and my hands are quite strong. But if you haven't been playing long, but you're getting these notes, if it's too difficult to hold that down and form the chord, you may want to try this tip. Go back to E major, the shape here, but switch your fingers around so that where your first finger is, on G sharp, put your middle finger. Where your other finger was, put your 3rd finger, and put your little finger on the 4th string, like that. So you now have an E shape, but instead of it being fingered that way, you've got your fingers in this configuration, like that. And as you can see, my first finger is now free. So we can take this shape, and without pressing too hard, but without losing contact with the strings, we can slide along to here. So this finger, my 3rd finger is at the 5th fret, and my little finger is at the 5th fret. We can put our thumb under the neck and practice putting that bar all the way across the 6 strings, like that. One thing to watch out for is your little finger may want to flatten out at this point because you're not used to it, and you'll end up barring some of the strings you don't want with your little finger down here. So you have to practice keeping the joints of your fingers that are holding that E shape fairly vertical from the fingerboard, like that. The nice thing is too, when you add an E shape, your bar finger isn't really having to do that much work at pressing on the 5th, 4th and 3rd strings, since that chord shape itself is taking care of those notes. It's really, you only have to worry about barring the 1st and 2nd with this part of your finger here, and the 6th string with your fingertip at the other end, like that. Now if you can, try and get this bar chord completed, and best of luck with it. It will seem quite a difficult task to do, but once you get it, it opens up a whole lot of possibilities for more complicated songs other than the ones that present themselves with the chords that we've learnt here. That brings us to the end of the Beginners series. I hope you've enjoyed learning from me as much as I've enjoyed teaching you. Now, if you've mastered most of the material, you'll be ready to go on to the more advanced categories. I look forward to seeing you there.